morning, everybody. I'm Brandon Dahl, as Abe mentioned, native to Las Vegas here. I was an executive for the Raiders for many years and then transitioned to starting Sports and Entertainment Advisors. Here with me today to my immediate right, Dr. Robert Robbins, Drew Weatherford, and Tim Pernetti. If you're not familiar with these gentlemen, probably should be. Their bios are in the SBJ event app. Guys, in preparing for this panel, talked to a lot of people, including a lot of people in the audience here. Conferences, schools, ADs, folks in the media. There are a lot of questions about private equity in college athletics. Probably more questions than answers, to be honest. What's the investment horizon? How big are the investments? What are we actually investing in? Drew, you're a former student athlete, quarterback at Florida State, founder of Weatherford Capital, founder of Collegiate Athletic Solutions, along with Redbird. Can you give us kind of a 101 on private equity and sort of set the record straight for the audience here? What is it? What isn't it?
Sure. Yeah, happy to do it. Great to be here. I think the most challenging thing about this journey in kind of private equity and collegiate sports is the actual term itself, which is private equity. The truth is the only way that private capital can be invested in collegiate athletics today is not an equity form. And so the term itself should kind of be flushed down the toilet, to be completely honest with you. If you think of private equity, it's a very general term. And it's funny, if you have a conversation with 10 people, they'll all jump to a different kind of aspect of it. But it's really can be structured very differently, and it can be in very different stages. So there's venture capital, which is considered to be private equity. There's growth equity, which is private equity. There's buyouts, like barbarians at the gate, which is what most people think about when they think about private equity. There are real assets like real estate, and then there's private credit. And frankly, there's many, many more asset classes, but people talk about all of those things when they think about private equity. And then there's another aspect of private equity, specifically around collegiate sports, which is what Smash Capital is talking about, what Lynn Perna is talking about, which is another thing that people's minds race to when they think of private equity. So I just outlined about 6 different directions that people's minds flow to when they think of private equity. The truth is what Collegiate Athletic Solutions is doing, and frankly, any private equity firm is doing as it relates to college sports today and investing, has nothing to do with equity, which is a really important aspect to take into consideration, because with equity comes a lot of things that generally people are afraid of, right? When you buy equity in something, you actually have a ownership piece of it. You cannot buy, nor does anyone intend, including us, to buy a piece of equity of an athletic department, right? Like that's not what we're doing. We also don't have any governance authority, which is what you typically get when you buy a piece of equity. You either own shares, or in a lot of cases you have a board seat. Collegiate Athletic Solutions is not going to have a board seat on a university board or on an athletic department board. And then you also, with equity, typically want to own it for 3 to 5 years and sell it. So the time horizon is very different. We're talking about entering into relationships with the universities for 15 to 20 years, which is very different. And so it's about as far away from equity as you can think. And I think that's something that's really important for everybody to understand when they think about private equity being invested at the university or conference level today. It is not going to be structured in a traditional equity-like manner.
Tim, you bring a unique perspective, building businesses, running athletic departments, now running a conference. Why do you think there's so much conversation around private equity in college athletics right now? And anything that you want to add to some of the misconceptions that you're seeing out there as well would be great.
Well, great to be here. Drew, what he explained is really important for the entire room to understand, because there is that word. We've come to call it the E word at our place, because you hear that word and you immediately think ownership and control. But it's been an education process. Like, I actually would love to take Drew Weatherford to every conference and athletic department in America to help them understand what all the pathways are. The way we look at it from the conference perspective is, we think it's a more attractive opportunity for a private investment group, private capital group, whatever it is, to come in and capitalize the asset at the conference level, because you're opening the door to multiple valuable pieces of intellectual property. And by bringing everything together, you have the ability to create new inventory, new experiences, new events. The bottom line, you just heard it. You're making a bet on something that's tried and true. Like, why do I think it's interesting to their industry? It has massive affinity, which is growing. If you look at how the business side has grown exponentially and at huge clips over a period of time, you see tried and true growth. And maybe at times we're not an industry that operationally is incredibly well run. And I say this all the time. You know, Drew and I had a connection in the IMG Academy investment. And everybody talked about the number. It's acquisition and PE, and look at this number. And what I would say is, as the person that was running that business every single day, the real value you get out of a private capital partner is you get access to expertise in strategy, in thought leadership, in cost control, which is something that we really need in this industry. You get access to expertise that I can tell you from my own personal experience, our industry has not yet seen. So that's why it's attractive. And we know that the industry is going to continue to grow. It's going to continue to be popular. It's going to continue to expand. But every business under the sun, no matter what you do and who you are, if you've had success, you build your business, you set your goals, and in order to achieve them, you bring private investment in to help you accelerate your ability to get to that point. And that's why it's attractive. And right now, everybody has to be thinking differently. This is not just about what it used to be about. This is about building an enterprise that has long-term sustainability. At the end, the thing that nobody talks about anymore needs to be talked about. Like, all of these new resources are about continuing to reinforce what the mission is. Provide a great experience for kids that have made a bet on you that you're going to give them the best experience they can have.
Thank you, Dr. Robbins. You provide the university president perspective here. Why do you think university presidents have been seemingly reluctant to pursue private equity in college athletics?
Yeah, I agree with Tim. He should take Drew on a roadshow to all the university presidents and chancellors.
My wife would not be happy with that.
Yeah, well, I think she would. You know, you probably want to visit a lot of campuses, and they're great places to be. But I'd start out by saying, you know, another former current quarterback famously said one time, everybody just RELAX. So I am much more relaxed after hearing Drew's explanation about we're not coming in to take equity stake in the conference or in an athletic department. I don't think that could work, first of all. And I think that the reason why we're having this discussion is because, as the panel yesterday that Lynn was on, I'm really intrigued with what they're up to, and I want to learn more about it. But I think the reason we're talking about this is because, you know, as President Baker came to our summit about a year and a half ago in D.C., I think college athletics is, to use a term from my former life, is in the ICU in critical care. And we need an infusion of money. We need to increase revenue and control expenses, and the House settlement is only another expense that we're going to have to deal with. So I think certainly I am, and I know many of my colleagues would be open to having a discussion with Drew or other private investments. You know, I didn't talk to Ross about it, and I don't know if he's still here, but it predated him. And I know a little bit about this because I almost went down a pathway before I got to Arizona with this fund. But the Ohio State University, they contracted with a infrastructure partner, the Queensland Sovereign Fund. They basically had them come in and operate their parking and transportation operation at Ohio State, and they paid them a big amount for that up front. And so I can see that there's some opportunity for us as universities to enter in some of those type deals where we have true long-term partnerships with private money that comes in, and because at the end of the day, wherever this money comes from, you're going to have to get a return on your investment. And that has to be a win-win for both sides. So, we've talked a lot about, land. Ross said this yesterday. There's land around our campuses. Certainly at University of Arizona, we have some land proximate to our athletic facilities, and there could be some joint venture between private infusion of money, and you have to have a return for them, but it also has to be a win for the university. So I think that we're going to see more and more conversations about this. I'm glad to hear you're not going to take 50% owner or 49% ownership of the athletic department and be having a vote on who the next coach is and all of those kind of things, because I think that'd be very complicated to pull off. But we all have to open our minds to we have to have new sources of revenue. And I was particularly interested in the discussion on the panel yesterday about the role of private equity coming in to help with the transition startup cost for the proposal that Lynn and his group is talking about. I think that's a perfect place for private infusion and investment.
And actually, Brendan, I agree. I do think at some point in time there's going to have to be major restructuring of college athletics. The problem is that's going to take congressional help. That could take 10 years, right? I think there's two things that were mentioned in yesterday's panel that are really important to take note of. One, Jeffrey Kessler thinks if House passes, there's going to be $20 billion of new capital that's necessary for the collegiate athletic ecosystem. $20 billion over the next 10 years. That's one issue. The other issue is we can all agree that there is not the appropriate amount of competitive balance that we want to see in college athletics. If we're not careful, we're going to wake up in 5 years and there's not going to be a belief on a lot of campuses that they can actually compete for a championship. If you look at the last 25 years, there's only been 2 teams that have won a national championship that are not now in the SEC or Big Ten, and that is Florida State and Clemson. I'm willing to predict that over the next 25 years, there will be no more and potentially less than 2 schools that win a national championship unless something changes. What we're doing, which is different than what Lynn is doing, that's kind of the future state, we're trying to approach it in a practical way today to basically provide bridge financing from now to that future state and trying to help schools that are at a financial disadvantage to ultimately try to level the competitive playing field. Because the truth is, if you look at the data, the most wealthy schools and the ones that invest the most in college athletics win the most. It is very, very closely correlated. So we're trying to partner with schools in all the Power 4 and 5 conferences, and even the Group of 5, to not solve the problem. You're not going to go from a $80 million revenue program to $250 like Ohio State, but you might be able to go from 150 to 200, right? And then you can max out on revenue sharing, et cetera, which should ultimately help the ecosystem from our vantage point.
Some great questions coming in here, so keep those coming. Tim, it seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like conferences are closer to getting a deal like this done than the schools. Do you agree? And also, what are the hurdles that you see, putting your former AD hat on, you see ADs having when it comes to this topic?
This is going to happen. I mean, I don't think this is an if anymore.
Yeah.
I think it's a when, and I think it's coming in the short term. And I, for one, in the position that I'm in, like as a commissioner, your job, you have a million things you have to do. But in the current climate, your job is to figure out a way to develop more incremental resources to provide to your institutions in order to be able to accelerate investment in enterprise. And when people hear about this, some folks have said, well, this will be really important to have dry capital. Like, what if you have to buy out a coach? I'm sitting here saying, you don't get to buy out a coach with this. Like, this investment is about creating enterprise value in the future. You have groups that are out there looking to invest because they believe in the revenue growth and they believe in the enterprise value. So it's not an if, it's a when. What are the hurdles? Change, just in general. And the thing that has been shocking to me is the climate has been changing around us for longer than the last 2 years. okay? This industry, and this is not a criticism of anyone because I was in it for a while as an athletic director, the industry has failed to modernize itself and make decisions over a period of time that have landed us where we are. So we can do one of two things. We could lament that, which is a total waste of time, or we could try to do something about it. So change is number one. The other hurdle Drew just explained to everyone, which is this is actually what it means. It's not ownership control, votes on your new coach. This is a belief investment, a passive belief investment in something that you know is going to grow. They're choosing to get in to try to accelerate that growth. And by accelerating it, you have an asset as a conference. I know how much revenue is coming in over the next 10 years. It's contractual, it's guaranteed, it's coming in the door. I have an asset that's worth a certain amount of value that I don't want my schools to wait every year for their share. I want to accelerate all that investment into the next 3 years and give us a chance to be able to be competitive. But the important point everybody needs to get their arms around, and quite frankly, I would say get a grip on, is things need to change. The structure needs to change. Instead of looking at college football and saying there's Big Ten football and ACC football and American football, college football is the product. For years, commissioners have protected their enterprise, but I would argue worked together to move the enterprise forward as a single enterprise. That's why all this value has been accretive over all this time. Now we're at a very dangerous point. Because I can tell you from being at Army and Navy and Tulane and East Carolina, they don't care any less about their experience and their access to compete at the highest level than anyone at any other conference. So we're at a very dangerous tipping point. And if we don't organize and protect the product, we could be headed for rough waters in the future. So this is not an if, it's a when. I think it's essential to bring partnerships in to help us achieve these goals. But everybody has got to get a grip that it's changing under our feet. So we could keep tap dancing and hoping that it stops, or we could actually move with it. But we're behind it.
Tim brought up a good point, which he says it's passive, and it is from a governance standpoint. But it should feel like working with a bank that actually understands sports and how to professionalize your athletic department, your conference, right? So in one way, it shouldn't feel that much different than a relationship with a lender of some kind, but it's a value-added investment that someone is making. So it's kind of the best of both worlds, right? You're getting someone who doesn't have governance control over your university or your athletic department, but you're also getting an investor that is invested in professional sports, that has built businesses in partnership with the NFL, that has built one-team partners, right, which is name, image, and likeness. Virtually every line item that matters to a university's athletic department, we had built billion-dollar businesses in those line items, and I do feel like could come alongside an athletic director and actually help them think differently about the future of college sports.
Drew, can you talk about, go ahead, Dr. Robbins.
No, go ahead and I'll bring
Can you talk about continuity and turnover within college athletics and how that 15 to 20 year horizon can actually complement that?
So it's a great question. I think alignment is really important here. It's not news to anyone in the room that the average tenure of a president is 6 years. The average tenure of an athletic director is like 5. I'm rounding here. And the average tenure of an SBS coach is 4. So in the horizon of a relationship with a group like ours, if we could be, our relationship could be as short as 5 years. It could be as long as 50 if you want to continue the relationship. I believe a private capital provider that is aligned, which we are, with the way that we make money with future revenue growth, et cetera, can actually create a stabilizing force when there's turnover at the president level, when there's turnover at the athletic department level, when there's coaches changes, to have financial and organizational controls with smart people that have real money at risk to make sure that the trains still run on time. I think that's a net positive for the institution as a whole. I'd be very interested in Dr. Robbins' opinion of that.
Please.
It ties into what I was going to say. I spent a lot of time running up and down Sand Hill Road when I was at Stanford talking to venture capitalists. And if you're a startup company or you're a distressed asset, I would say most athletic departments are a distressed asset at this point. But in the startup mode, it was always preached, don't focus too much on valuation. because would you rather own 1% of Amazon or 100% of nothing? And I think that we've got to explore these opportunities and understand what it means if you come in as our partner. And I go back to that Queensland Sovereign Fund example. That was a 30 to 50 year relationship. That was an infrastructure partnership. And it's most of the guiding principles are the same in what you're talking about. I think being able to demystify, and you did a good job in your opening comments, demystify and explain exactly what conferences, what athletic departments would get out of. I understand the expertise and investment in professional teams, but what are the hard numbers? If you came to me and said, well, we'll put in, make it easy math, we'll put in $1 million, and over the next 5 years, you're going to realize $3 million more than you would have realized, and we're going to realize $3 million more. So we're going to grow $5 million together, and we can split that. So I think getting people comfortable with what does a deal look like? What does the term sheet look like?
Dr. Robbins, he's bringing up a really great point, which is around structure. The beautiful thing about how these things are structured is that our returns are based on future revenue growths, right? So our cost of capital, if you will, can be as low as bond financing. It could be 4% if revenues don't grow, right? If revenues do grow, then our returns look better, but ultimately the partnership is working and we're growing ticketing revenue and we're growing concessions revenue, and there's a new media rights deal, or we help you get into a new conference that might elevate your earnings. So that's the beauty of the structure, and that's why I go back to alignment. There is real alignment for the private capital provider to not just give you capital and step away. We also can't force ourselves in and make decisions, but we are aligned and have a vested interest to make sure that revenues grow in the future, which I think creates really good relationship between the two parties.
Yeah, I think the angels are in the details of this, not the devils, but the angels.
There you go. Tim, Drew just mentioned conference realignment and expansion. How do you think this plays a role in that the shaping of conference realignment?
So, back in September, I was about 90 days into the job, and I found myself in the fire on conference realignment, which I expected. My wife and I kind of had a bet because we know the business. She's like, when's the first, what do you think, 100 days, more or less? She had the under, I had the over, she won the bet. So, but when you're in the midst of it, you understand, and people came to me and they said, wow, conference realignment is happening. And I'm like, conference realignment's been happening for 100 years. And in the modern era, and when I was at Rutgers and we moved Rutgers into the Big Ten Conference, I was very transparent about what it was. Like, we talked about all the reasons, but we needed to find a place that provided far more broad-based exposure and far more revenue upside for long-term sustainability. And that's what's happening today. The challenge with all of this, because I've talked to a number of groups about investing in our conference, at the core is unity. Because everybody is thinking about how do we build so we can get somewhere else? I do think that's a mentality in collegiate athletics. The business that I came into when I was in my 20s really was built on a foundation of unity, and I think we lack that right now as an industry. So that is something that's really, really important. What I've said to our institutions is, we can do this, but if you aspire to be something different in the future, you have to decide what's best for you. But you're here right now. Be where your feet are, let's build it together. Because if you're not going to get all in and build, I think it's less attractive to private capital partners. How can it play a role in realignment? I think the theory is, here's all this infusion of capital. You spread it out to your schools, there's a list of things they can invest it in to create value, and that's the way it goes. The way I see it is, you do all that, but you also have to have powder dry to make a compelling financial argument as things start to come apart, which they will, to be able to shore up your part of the industry. So I think they give you a way to sort of accelerate investment, because the typical process is, hey, we're going to bring you in, and we're betting on our next TV contract. Well, what if that TV contract's 10 years away? Mm-hmm. You have to figure out a way to do it. We are not going to dilute our league. That's rule number one. We are not going to dilute the membership. So this gives you a solution to that. long term. But unity is something we all got to look each other in the face and be real that we're either going to build or we're not. And if we're together, I think there are great opportunities. If you're not together, it's going to be harder. But you know whether it's Smash Capital or what Len Perna's group is doing, you know, the College Student League, I would say to everybody in the industry, whatever your opinion is on change, you need to park it, because we need to have these conversations. Having a conversation doesn't mean you're going to do it. But why are we so hung up that we know better than everyone else? This is a different business than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever it is. And as a former TV guy who bought rights, it's much more fun to sell them than buy them. But think about the selling power of college football as a single entity. Everybody thinks they're capturing massive amounts of the market. I would argue if you put the whole thing together, people would be shocked at the upside and the ability to fund and take coaches out of the NIL business and be able to provide resources to manage all the challenges that we have on campus right now.
Yeah, as a former NFL guy, it's a good model.
Well, and to his point, it's part of the investment thesis too, in full transparency.
Yep.
We believe that there is a lot of upside, and we actually are we are investing with expectation that there will continue to be realignment and that conferences will continue to consolidate, which will give them more leverage. And then the ultimate example of that is if it's all negotiated together, which has been talked about a lot over the last couple days. But as each conference gets bigger and has more leverage, they will negotiate a better deal, right? College athletics right now, or college football is $4 billion, the NFL's $14 billion. There was some math around yesterday that they think it should be 10 if we just matched what the NBA just did. We're not going to be able to do that unless there's consolidation, and that might be really slow, right? With, you know, conferences getting bigger and bigger and bigger, but ultimately everyone would benefit if it was all done more collectively, and we think that'll happen over time.
We've got about 3 minutes left. I do want to get to a couple of questions from the audience. Drew, you and I actually talked about this a couple weeks ago, but if there's no equity and it's growth capital, isn't that exactly what Legends and Playfly are doing? Is there some precedent there? What's different?
It's actually very interesting. When you think about the relationship a university has with one of those entities who are great, we're not replacing what they're doing, all right? So we're not competing with Learfield or Playfly, but essentially they are securitizing, they're buying your MMR rights, and they're advancing capital on an annual basis, and then they're going out and selling that inventory, right? So what we're doing is we're actually not just taking that one revenue line item, we're taking all of the permissible revenue line items, right, your unrestricted revenues, and we're just lending against a bigger number, which is providing more capital up front. And in a similar fashion, you're just paying that out, right? It's not a fixed 10% that you have to pay every year. There's actually not a balloon payment. We're at real risk if COVID happens again, or if you get left out of your conference, like we might not make our money back, right? So it's not equity, which I described earlier. It's also not traditional debt because there's not a fixed coupon that you're ultimately paying, and there's real downside risk for us. And so it's a really elegant solution that I think works. It's technically, Dr. Robbins, you'll appreciate this, it's an off-balance sheet transaction, so it doesn't negatively impact the university's bonding capacity, which frankly should be used for the university purposes, not necessarily athletics. And it also doesn't negatively impact their bond rating, which is very, very important to every CFO on the planet at a university. So it's been uniquely kind of designed in a way to custom fit universities. And we're the only fund that has actually been raised by investors that know this is the structure, know what the return profile looks like. This is not private equity dollars. This is investors that are investing in this specific instrument.
We've got about 40 seconds left. One last quick one for the group. Over under on one of these deals happening in a year. Dr. Robbins?
I would take the under on that.
Over.
Under. You lose, Drew.
Appreciate you guys. Everyone, please thank Dr. Robbins, Drew Weatherford, Tim Pernetti for a fantastic panel.